something. Are you coming to join us, ladies? Yeah. We're just about to make a start. Perfect timing. Miranda, are you coming in or staying out? Well, come on, you're welcome. Right, there's only a few of us here, so you're going to have to make loads of noise. So when I ask for a sterling round of applause for our speaker, we want plenty of whoops and hollers, because there's only 7. It will fill up, I know it's full, because it always does. This is entitled "The Big Legal Question We Need to Ask." And it's aimed at anybody that's running a fleet, and I know that this gentleman's got just one vehicle, but it amounts to the same thing. That you don't really want to end up in front of the traffic commissioner, despite the fact that those of us who went to the BAR conference know that he's a very nice man. But you don't really want to go there, and you don't want to have an audience with him. And you can finish up having an audience with him for all kinds of reasons. It could be overloading, it could be a bridge strike, it could be a tachograph problem or whatever. And not only do you not want to get there, but our speaker is going to be giving us a few hints as how to not finish up in front of him. But he's also going to be helping you a bit about what to do and what to say should you be unfortunate enough to do so. So please welcome from Backhouse Jones, Scott Bell. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name's Scott Bell. I'm one of the regulatory lawyers at Backhouse Jones. For my sins, you guys all want to avoid public inquiries. I love them. I get paid to be there at them. I do around about 60 to 70 a year nationally. So after today, I'm off to Eastbourne tomorrow for the pleasure of Sarah Bell. I'm sure it won't be a pleasurable experience for the person sat next to me, but it will be for me. Really, we've been asked to do a presentation on how to avoid it. If you do have a problem, how you can set about looking to avoid the public inquiry. Just forgive me, my voice will hold out for the next 40 minutes, I assure you. It's feeling a bit gravelly today, but it will hold out, I'm sure. So getting back up to speed, and this presentation is meant to be interactive, so I will pick on the rest of you that are here, but we'll do our best. So topics of conversation today, what sort of issues might lead to a public inquiry, what is the Traffic Commissioner actually looking for if you have the unfortunate reason of attending a public inquiry, how can you influence the decision at the public inquiry? It is all upon you, and your actions do have a heavy bearing on that outcome. I'm going to talk a bit about the tachograph record keeping obligations. Those who have been at a BAR conference before will have seen me present about this and the problems that it's certainly causing for this industry. And then the role of the transport manager and how that's been impacted on legislative change. So, to my audience, what are the reasons you can end up a public inquiry? Give me some examples of why you can end up a public inquiry. What can happen? What can go wrong? Maintenance, overloading, hitting a bridge, running one of those 3.5 tonners with about 7 ton of weight in it. Tacos. You get away with it. Well, no. So if you've got an operator license and you run 3.5 tonners, you haven't got one. You can't. So if you haven't got one, no, you face prosecution. Criminal prosecution for it. But if you ever want to enter the industry in the future, into operator licensing, so obviously I'm aware a lot of companies start out small, start on the man in the van, moves, gain a following, then want to get into operator licensing. Those overloading prosecutions can come back to haunt you in the future, in front of the Traffic Commission where you try and get a licence. But in reality, there's a lot of reasons you can end up on public inquiry. And as the screen fills up, you'll recognise some of them. Driver CPC issues, load security, defect reporting, tachos, using unauthorised sites, ANPR data. All of these reasons means that you can end up at the public inquiry. Now, some of you operating fleet will no doubt receive prohibitions. From time to time your vehicles might be overloaded, and you might be found to be overloaded. You might have a health and safety breach, all of these sort of things. So what is the Traffic Commissioner actually looking at? If you have a prohibition, if you have a false tachograph, if the driver does something unfortunately a bit silly. So these issues on their own generally won't lead to a public inquiry. So if you have a bridge strike on its own, it generally won't lead to a public inquiry. What the Traffic Commissioner does is they look at the incident in question, they look at your history as an operator, how long you've been operating, what your record was previously. They look at the gravity of the matter, so how serious that actual incident was. And then they start to make an assessment of you, even before it comes to a public inquiry, whether I can trust them, whether I think they can be compliant going forward. And sometimes, if you can answer those questions in the affirmative, sometimes you can avoid that public inquiry process. So what should you do to influence those questions before you end up at public inquiry, even if you have one of these incidents that we're talking about? And what we say is that there are triggers. There's always a trigger, and acting on that trigger is the most important part of compliance. The first trigger for action is when that initial incident happens. So when you get a roadside prohibition, if you have a bad fail at MOT, if you get an S-mark prohibition, meaning a serious prohibition, if you have a bridge strike, that is your first opportunity to respond and deal with it, to try and answer that question in the affirmative. Do I think they can trust them going forward? Do I think they're going to remain compliant? So what we're talking about here is, if you have one of these issues, you have a prohibition at the roadside, the Traffic Commissioner expects a degree of openness with its operators, and for you to proactively solve the issue. It sounds silly, okay? So let's say you have an MOT failure. A brake fails on MOT. It happens from time to time. What the Traffic Commissioner may expect from you is to undertake your own investigation, to speak to the maintenance contractor if it's outsourced, or if it's internal, to do an investigation yourself. Obtain a response from the maintenance contractor as to the circumstances, what happened, why it happened, what sort of countermeasures we can put in place to stop it happening in the future. And then you might want to send that information to the Traffic Commissioner and say, we've had an MOT failure, a brake failed on test. The reason for the failure was the chamber blew out. This is a random failure, it could have happened at any time. The vehicle was subject to a brake test before it went down the test lane, it passed on that brake test. Here's everything that's happened. Please take it into consideration. Quite often you can do that, and the Traffic Commissioner will look at that information, they do review this, and they'll stop the DVSA from coming in to do an investigation. Okay? It also means that you could actually send this information to your local DVSA test centre and say, look, we've had this MOT fail, this is the circumstances, this is what happened, here's all our information. That may stop the DVSA coming out to do an investigation, a full investigation on your systems. I'll give you another example, a bridge strike. You know, from time to time it happens. They reckon the stats are nationally that 5 to 8 bridge strikes a day by commercial vehicles, and the DFT are putting significant pressure on the Traffic Commissioners to stop its operators hitting bridges. And if you happen to have a bridge strike because the driver's gone off route or failed to read a road sign, I had a very, very funny one recently with a driver who hit a bridge that was 9'8" high, in an Arctic. When the traffic commissioner, I wasn't representing the driver, I was representing the operator. The driver was involved in the hearing, and the driver was asked, he said, well, why did you hit the bridge? He said, well, I just hit it. He said, well, did you not see it? Not particularly, no. I said, well, it must have been an eye line at 9'8" in an Arctic. Well, it didn't have a sign. At which point the traffic commissioner said, well, yeah, you were going the wrong way up a one-way street at the time, so it probably didn't have a sign on it, did it? And it didn't end well for him, let's put it that way. It turned out he was looking at his sat-nav because he got lost. Ended up going up a one-way street, which was car access only, and went into a 9'8" bridge. He lost his licence for 6 months. His professional driving licence for 6 months. Oh, complete stupidity, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it sort of moved on from there now. If ever the DVSA come out to speak to an operator for whatever reason, one of the questions that they're marking transport managers and operators on is investigations into prohibition and MOT failures, and they expect a documented investigation. So whatever the circumstance, even if it's a random failure such as a brake chamber, they expect the transport manager to form some sort of investigation, written investigation, that they at least see in file. So if they come out, they expect to see it, so you've got to do it anyway. So what the traffic commissioners are saying, what we say, is that sometimes you might want to send that information in proactively so the DVSA don't come out to see it. Because if you open the door, potentially they find more than just dealing with the issue in isolation, if you get what I mean. Now, it might be a bit extreme with a brake chamber failing on test because of the nature of it, but if you get a prohibition at the roadside, for example, you know, I definitely recommend doing the written investigation. I definitely recommend sending that information into the traffic commissioner about what you've done about it, because it does stop the DVSA coming out sometimes, because they see you being open and honest, they see you being transparent, and they see you doing something about it. All right. So we expect that on a bridge strike example. There is no legal obligation to report that to the traffic commissioner, but if you hit a Network Rail infrastructure, Network Rail will tell the traffic commissioner. Okay? So you're better to get in first and tell the traffic commissioner yourself. Document the process, document your policies and procedures, document what happened, what you've done about it, any countermeasures you may put in place to stop it happening in the future. And it may just negate the traffic commissioner calling you in. It might just end up in a warning or something along those lines. So what they expect is whenever you have this first trigger at the roadside, this first incident, this first occasion, they expect you to do something about it. And that's because what the appeal courts talk about is when they're asking this question of trust and whether you could trust the operator going forward, what they're asked to look at is the attitude of the operator. The attitude of the operator to the response, how quickly they resolved whatever's gone wrong, because let's face it, things go wrong all the time. And how quickly they've put immediate and effective steps in to resolve it. And can they demonstrate those immediate and effective steps? So your first opportunity is on trigger 1. The second opportunity is when the DVSA come in and they'll say X, Y, Z is wrong. You're then expected to put it right. And we do a lot of work with operators dealing with trigger 1 and trigger 2 because we want to avoid trigger 3, 4 and 5. So undertaking that response on trigger 1 and trigger 2, making sure the correct detail is in there, what they want to hear, actually trying to provide some tangible evidence, something to show that what you've put into place is working, is really beneficial. So if you say that you're going to train the drivers, do a toolbox talk on defect reporting, or you're going to do a toolbox talk because you've had an overloading incident or a load security incident, actually demonstrate you've done the toolbox talk, send in the copy, send in the signatures at the time. You know, it becomes really, really powerful if you could show that information at the same time. If you're responding at triggers 3, 4 and 5, so if you're making changes to systems because you've received the call-up letter to a public inquiry, or you're just before the public inquiry, or God forbid, the traffic commissioner tells you need to change something, you're in a much weaker position. And the outcome of the public inquiry will be much more severe against the operator. Okay? Because the traffic commissioners in their proportionality and how they check things have to assess what your response is to the issue, because they accept things go wrong. All right, but they expect you to go about resolving them. So what's that actually mean in practice? What are you expected to do? They're expected to undertake training of transport managers. We've been talking about this for donkey's years. A transport manager, a nominated transport manager, should be doing at least 2 days of CPD in a 5-year cycle. They expect that these days. The more recent change and more recent expectation is that directors and senior managers who have the responsibility to manage the transport manager should be undertaking CPD as well. An element of understanding what operator licensing is. So an OLAC course, Operator License Awareness Training course, something along those lines. Because there's a decision out there that says that the director must have sufficient knowledge to ask the transport manager the right questions, you know, hold them to account. It's simply not good enough these days to say, well, it's the transport manager's job, I rely on him or her to do that job, and I leave it to them. That's not the way to do it. The director, senior manager is meant to have enough knowledge to check it themselves. You're expected to have a degree of external auditing on transport-specific issues. Most businesses in the transport game will have health and safety consultants come out, do an audit every year, 2 years. Transport should be part of that auditing process and should be reported up to the board with actions and recommendations, understanding of what that should entail. There should be a degree of auditing on the maintenance providers, you know, whether that's internal or external, you know, understanding who's actually looking after your vehicle, what level of training they have, what quality control procedures they have. That's all feeding in now as part of the risk-based approach to checking your vehicles and making sure things are working correctly. HR disciplinary. Traffic commissioners have an expectation that human resources buy in to operator licensing, so that if you use a provider that, like, I won't name any names, Peninsula, who don't quite understand what an operator licensing is, what a TACO is, and why falsifying a TACO is a really serious thing. You know, are they actually providing you with actual advice, good advice to protect your operator licensing? You know, I had another example of an operator who had Peninsula as a provider. They had a driver who's been with them for 14 years and started falsifying his TACOs. All right, they had instructed the operator he'd committed about 6 or 7 false records for his own benefit. They instructed the operator that they couldn't dismiss him for gross misconduct until I got involved and said, great, if the DVSA discovered this, he's looking at Crown Court and potential porridge. You know, it's really, really serious stuff. This is gross misconduct, and the reason for that is they were looking at a driver who'd got 14 years of service. They were ensuring any outcome in tribunal, and in fairness, the operator said, well, we won't take your advice, we accept we're not covered and we'll dismiss anyway. But their standing advice at the start was that you couldn't even bring him in on gross misconduct and then issue a final written warning. You know, so you've got to make sure that whatever the provider you're using understands why driver licensing is important, why defect reporting is incredibly important for your systems. Sorry, I mean, on driver handbooks, traffic commissioners now ask for that as part of the training material if you get to a public inquiry, and they will rip that apart. If it's not a driver handbook, I remember one of my operators presented one to me, provided not by Peninsula but by somebody similar, for commercial vehicle drivers, and it was basically grey white fleet driver handbook, talking about doing checks on company cars. So this is absolutely useless. It's not operator licensing. It's not commercial vehicle licensing. You've got to make sure it's covered. With sort of falsification of records or not undertaking a defect report, or checking a vehicle adequately, whilst the handbook might not say that in so many words, for me that is breach of health and safety regime. Doing a defect check on a vehicle is a health and safety requirement at the very least, and the falsification of a tacho record is falsification of company documents, statutory required documents, so it's always gross misconduct. Every single policy will have that in as a falsification of company documents. Just saying, Peninsula only dismiss if they punch you, if the driver punches you. Going back to, I love telling a few war stories. Again, another tribunal hearing we had where there was an audio recording made by the driver in a disciplinary, and the driver starts shouting, I'll use a different name, Mark, stop punching me. Stop punching me, stop punching me, stop punching me. And Mark sat there and going, what are you on about, John? I'm sat at my desk. And the driver was pretending as part of this hearing that he was being punched. Little did he know that Mark had a CCTV camera pointing at his office and you could see him sat there. That quickly failed, and the driver got some serious action taken against him by the tribunal, and it had to pay a lot of costs, let's put it that way. So making sure it actually fits in with your system. The other big change that the traffic commissioners are expecting for senior management and senior board for medium to large businesses, and an element of KPIs reporting into the board, senior management, on operator license specific compliance events. So like MOT fails, prohibitions, on-time inspections, tachograph infringements, that sort of information, and an element of sort of traffic light system that's easily understandable for larger fleets, to see that information so the board can act on it. The other big issue in the industry that anybody running a fleet, especially in your industry, will know, and I know at the BAO conference, me, Paul, and a few of us had a massive debate about this, was the tachograph record keeping requirements and the DFT's recent announcement on them. So, in essence, through a change of the law in August 2020 that the DVSA forgot about for a year and a bit, it made a requirement that any driver under EC driver's hours having to use a tachograph had to keep a full record of his work and rest for the previous 28 days. So if I jumped into a vehicle today to do an EC journey and I'd not driven for the last 28 days, the law change meant that I'd have to sit there before my journey commenced and make manual entries on the tachograph unit of all of my work and rest for the previous 28 days. Okay? Now, can anybody tell me what hours of work they did 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday? Accurately? No. Absolutely bonkers. All right, but it's legislation. It came in August 2020. The DVSA did nothing about it until January 2022. We made most of the trade associations aware of it in August 2020, and it just got ignored. It got mixed up in the pandemic. And everybody now is scrabbling around because they realise how much of an issue it's causing. I know one of my clients, they sat there and tried to do that, manually enter their work for the last 28 days. It took them 47 minutes, and they're quite actually good at doing manual entries. The other issue is that there's only so many inputs you can make on the machine before it sort of times out. So it absolutely unbelievable. Now in your industry, with drivers who may not drive every single day and may do storage work, might do yard work, might do office work, it clearly has an impact if you're going to jump in a vehicle. So what should you do? There's been some guidance that's been issued for domestic journeys only. If you're going into the EU, you are still required to record everything on a tachograph. Okay? But if you're doing domestic journeys only, there's been a relaxation. That if you do no EC driving in a week, you can do a print roll, a till print roll, and write on your hours of work and rest on that print roll rather than enter it onto the machine. Okay? If you do EC driving in that week, you've got to enter all of your work and rest onto the tachograph from the start of that week. Okay, so let's give the example of me today. I jump in a wagon on a Tuesday. I've done no EC driving for the last 28 days. So weeks 1 to 3, I can simply do a till roll printout for each week and write on there what my hours of work are. For this week, starting at midnight on Monday, so 000 hours on Monday morning, I'd have to manually enter all of my work for yesterday into the tachograph unit. Okay. I'm condensing what is a 3-hour training session on how to manage this into about 5 minutes. Okay, this is a massive change in what you're expected to do. Go out and get some specific training on it. There are providers out there, we provide it, the RHA provide it, and there are some specific courses. Make sure your drivers are trained to understand what to do, because the DVSA are enforcing this now. The DVSA have updated their guidance online, only 2 years late, GV262 as to what to do. Make sure you go out and issue it to your drivers, issue it to any ad hoc drivers. There are other ways of doing the recording, which is more complicated than me sitting here and telling you about it in a couple of minutes. So be aware of that. You can use attestations for certain reasons. But there is an obligation on operators to train their drivers on this. Not all driver CPC courses are updated to cover this. So if you send your drivers on a driver CPC course, make sure that's been said. It's not on, I don't think.
What I was going to say, Scott, is I'm not very good at technology. So I use the attestation form, the
Yep.
EU form, and that's perfectly, I find that quite easy, because probably like Mike here, we might drive a vehicle once in a blue moon, and I find it quite easy just to do the last 28 days manually.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay,
Yep.
yeah?
Yes. So the attestation form. So you might remember a few years ago, if you were sending a driver into Europe, you could use the attestation for holidays and stuff like that. You can use attestation forms to record these for your fixed weeks, where you do no driving. But you've got to do one for all work, and then you've got to do a second one for rest, and it's got to be signed off as well before you go. So for some operators that doesn't work, because if you can imagine, let's say I'm jumping in a wagon today because a driver's not turned in. Before I go out, and in a bit of an emergency, I've got to go and fill it all in and get the transport manager to sign it off. We may or may not be on site, or whatever the case may be. So you can use that, or some people press on the tachograph unit to print some till roll off with your card in, because then it has all your driver license details on it, and then just simply write those details on the back. So you might say Monday to Friday, office duties, total hours of work, 43 hours or whatever the case may be. I bet you'd love to only do 43 hours of office work a week, but let's say that is the case, and what your weekly rest is. But if you've not done anything on this, go and get some specific training. Really, really important on that. There's another change that's come in, although Richard Turfitt told me the other week that he's not really bothered about it, so I'm not going to centre on it too long. There's been a change in transport management that a traffic commissioner can now specify the number of transport managers that should be on a licence. We have a sort of an unwritten rule of thumb that it's one transport manager for every 50 vehicles. So if you don't fit within that pattern, the traffic commissioner may say, "Oh, have you got enough transport managers specified on the licence?" As I said, Richard Turf, he's not going to specify any numbers. He's just going to take it on a case-by-case basis. But if you work to the 1 to 50 rule, that's pretty much, you know, the rule of thumb in all of this. There's one other change before I get to any questions and look at my time. There's one other change I just want to highlight. I spoke to Paul about it before. There's been a recent appeal case that might have an impact on certain operators. It's an appeal case called Connor Construction. And basically, I'm making up the numbers, but if it's to this effect, they had an operator licence for 20 vehicles, but they had 30 vehicles in possession. And what they did seasonal work, so they did road maintenance. So during the summer, they'd be out fixing roads, and the vehicles involved in fixing roads would be out during the summer. And during the winter, the road fixing season ends, and they'd go and use some different vehicles for doing other work to keep everything ticking over. So what they would do is swap these vehicles on and off the licence depending on need. Basically, the traffic commissioner took umbrage in this and said, my view is you can't do this. And the appeal court agreed, even though the barrister who represented the traffic commissioner in the appeal court said, no, I don't think you need to specify these on the, I don't agree this is the case. And what the appeal court's basically said is any commercial vehicle in your possession must be specified on the licence at all times. Okay? Now, looking at your industry, you might have let's say a licence for 10 vehicles, and you'll have a mix of 32 tonners, 18 tonners, 7.5 tonners, yeah? And depending on the job, you might want to put 7.5 on it, you might put a 32 on it, or whatever the case may be. So you might be tempted to have a licence for, say, 10 vehicles, but have 15 in possession, because sometimes jobs necessitate different vehicles. What this decision means is that all 15 vehicles must be on a licence at all times. So you'd have to increase your operator licence to specify all of those vehicles, have an advert in the paper for all those vehicles, and probably more importantly, have the financial standing for all of those vehicles. Which is, for an extra 5 vehicles, another 20, 30 grand of finance that you've got to find as a small business. Now, it's causing a lot of issues in the industry, and the trade associations are dealing with this because it's everybody's view that this is simply not the case. And myself and Paul were talking before, it's not necessarily even the vehicles that you're looking to use. So let's say that you've been out to one of these shows and just bought 3 or 4 new vehicles that have been delivered. You want to put them straight on the road, but you've not sold the old ones yet. Okay? So you've got 3 vehicles sat in your yard waiting for disposal, waiting for somebody to buy them off you. Though all of those vehicles must be on the licence at all times, even though you've got no intention of using them. It's bonkers, absolutely bonkers. What we are saying to people, if you are in this position, the traffic commissioners are saying you need to increase your licence. The law requires you to specify any vehicle in your possession. That's in the operator licence company possession. A lot of operators might have another company that holds the assets, the vehicles, or might personally hold the vehicles because it's an asset personally. What you can do is hire the vehicles in when you need them to be used, and at all other times leave them with an asset holding company, because then they're not in the possession of the operator licence business. Okay? The other advice that we're saying to people, but this is not legal, it's up to the courts ultimately, and I have to caveat it on that way. It is our view that if you VOR'd a vehicle, declared it off-road, and you've SORN'd the vehicle, so there's no tax on it, it's not capable of being used, our view is that can be taken off the licence. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to suggest otherwise. But that is subject to the Traffic Commissioner's, the court's determination. But I think it'd be nonsensical to say otherwise. All right. Have a look at your fleets. It's a big change, and I wanted to sort of highlight it on here because I know it's been recorded, and I know this industry does tend to have different types of vehicles, so it potentially can become a bit of an issue. So with trailers, there's no requirement to specify a trailer on a licence, only if you go abroad. You have to specify trailers if you're going into the EU. It's always been our opinion that your parking authorisation for trailers at an operating centre doesn't need to cover all of your trailers, because you can't identify that trailer belonging to the entity, because there's nothing to identify, is there? Plus you might have trailers that are in there for storage reasons. Now if they're in there for storage reasons, they're actually in use, so they wouldn't need to be part of an operator licence thing. The other aspect is that you can only use as many trailers as you've got vehicles on the road. Obviously, you can't pull a trailer without a vehicle in front of it. So you sort of have to look at it in that realm. We're not so worried about trailers. It doesn't concern trailers. They just talk about vehicles in this decision. The Trade Association are looking at this. They're putting pressure on the DFT, but obviously everything else going on and nosedive in the economy seems to have taken precedence in all of this. They're trying to find a way around, because there's massive problems in the great industry. You know, you've got large operators out there who might get a delivery of 100, 200 vehicles at the start of the year, and they drip feed them into fleets. You know, they've got to be on the licence. It's nonsensical. Now, ironically enough, the appeal court is it's not binding, it's just persuasive. So the traffic commissioners could simply turn around and issue guidance and say, I know the appeal court have said this, but we're not going to follow it. But they've not so far. So we'll have to wait and see. But just bear in mind those issues. I'll come back to questions in a second, but we've got some upcoming training that might be of interest to you. So those who are in a senior position want to do operator licence awareness training, because you're senior management, you should have some understanding of operator licensing. Get yourself on the OLAT on the 6th of December. They get repeated on a month-by-month basis. The one on the tachos, 12th of December, it's about 70 quid, you know, including the VAT, I think. So, you know, it's well worth it to get that level of training. It gives you a massive insight. It's a couple of hours on that. It's a very, very popular course. We're getting sort of 50, 60 people on it every single month to do the tacho training. The other issue, certainly for your industry, is brake testing. We still get a lot of removers who fall foul of brake testing in the DVSA's eyes. That's because you're operating a lot of rigid vehicles. You've got to send them in laden, 65% of weight on. And how are you going to do that? You know, is your maintenance provider going to put some IBCs in the right place? Are you going to be responsible for doing that? At least four times a year, your vehicle should have a laden brake test over a rolling road, and that means 65% of weight on. Causes difficulties. How are you going to achieve it? If you're not doing that, take that away, implement it into the business straight away. If you're unsure what the requirements are, how to read brake tests, get yourself booked on that training on brake testing on the 26th. Again, it's a couple of hours of course. It's about 40, 50 quid. You know, it's well worth it, and it all forms part of CPD that you can demonstrate to the Traffic Commissioner in the future. So that's it for me. I think I'm pretty much on time, bang on time almost. Thanks for listening. Any problems, give us a shout, and any questions.
Okay, we've got time for a question or two if anybody has one, although we've been doing pretty well at the front anyway, haven't we?
Yeah.
Any more questions? Any more? No, they're all being very shy now. So
All thinking about lunch.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, guys.
Shame we didn't get a very big audience today for Scott's presentation, but just gives me an opportunity to say that this, as with all the presentations, will be published in the Mover magazine. So if you want to reflect on anything that Scott said, or that you didn't manage to catch all of it, then you'll be able to get it there. And also, you might be interested to know, I mean, Backhouse Jones come here every year and make some fantastic presentations and really give some very useful information. And every one of those we report in the Mover magazine. If you go to the Mover's website at mover.co.uk, in the top right-hand corner of the website is a search bar, and if you just type in Backhouse Jones, you will find everything that we've ever published about Backhouse Jones, including all the presentations for the last 12 years. So if you want to find out anything about what these good guys have been telling you over that time, just do that and you can find it, it's all there. Scott Bell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We've got starting again in just 10 minutes when we're going to be talking about the past, present and future of self-storage. So see you then. Thank you.